Welcome back to another session on methodology of literature. Today, we continue with New Criticism. We shall deal with Levis and also the Neo-Aristotelians. I want you to pay attention to the slides.
So we begin with F.R. Levis. Now F.R. Levis was a student and cultural critic of I.A. Richards. He was the editor of the journal Scrutiny, and he combined new critical formalism with Arnoldian belief that literature main concern was with moral and ethical ideas. He wrote and focused on the works of 19th and early 20th century writers, and he used closed system of the canonical works. In the great tradition, he notes Jane Austen, George Eliot, Henry James, and Joseph Conrad as great novelists because they used experimental new forms and also used the methods and procedures or applied these methods. Whereas you have the other critics like Cleanth Brooks, they wrote extensively on modernist poetry, whereas he concentrated on the 20th, 19th and 20th century writers. F.R. Levis. Now we will move on to the next topic, the topic which brings out the negative side or the weaknesses of New Criticism. So they did have weakness as well, and the Neo-Aristotelians were the ones who were less interested in celebrating ambiguity and paradox. They were against the new critics. They were called the Chicago School of Critics. They were also professors at Chicago University. They called themselves Neo-Aristotelians, and they were engaged in bringing a radical transformation in the stream of humanities. These critics included R.S. Crane, whom we talked about earlier when we studied Cleanth Brooks, Norman MacLean, Elder Olson, Richard McKeown. Now, they published a manifesto called Critics and Criticism, Ancient and Modern, and they attacked the tenets of new critics. They were influenced by the Aristotle's poetics. So, neo means new, and therefore they are the ones who believed in Aristotle. So, Neo-Aristotelians, that is, new moderns who still believed in the ideas of Aristotle's poetics. That's how you have Neo-Aristotelians. It is important to locate individual text according to the genre or tradition to which the text belongs. That's what the Neo-Aristotelians say, which is quite against the principles of the new critics. The new critics, they do not go for anything outside the text. Genre, tradition, all are deemed unwanted, unnecessary to the new critics. Whereas the new Aristotelians, according to them, a tradition or the history is important, or the socio-cultural contexts are important. Here, according to them, the Neo-Aristotelians, they point out that a genre or the tradition to which that text belongs is of utmost importance to understand the text well. For instance, if you are to speak about or if you are to analyze Sonnet 29, Shakespeare's Sonnet 29, according to the Neo-Aristotelians, it is important to know the history of whom, of what? Of sonnet, its structure, the genre to which it belongs, the tradition of sonnet, and so on and so forth. Whereas according to the new critics, none of these are important. Only the words in the text are of importance. Nothing else matters to them. You don't have to study the structure, you don't have to study the rhythm, you don't have to study from where you got the rhythm. All that matters is how the poem is presented for the new critics. Whereas the Neo-Aristotelians, according to them, they say to understand the text better, it is essential that you have to know its genre and the tradition to which it belongs. All right. So that is what the new Aristotelians are all about, and with that we come to the end of new criticism, and so I want you to go through the text carefully, only then you will understand. I want you to read page 44, 45 and 46. So all that I have spoken in the video are there in these pages of the text. Close reading, or otherwise called explication, is a distinctive procedure in new criticism. It is a detailed analysis of complex interrelations and ambiguities, that is multiple meanings, of the verbal and figurative components within a work. It is a detailed examination of the complex relationship between a text's formal elements and its theme. So it's all about what? It's all about the form. It's all about what is written in the text, the interrelation and the ambiguities, the interrelation between the figures of speech, the irony that is mentioned, the tension in poetry, the connotative, the denotative meaning, and how it is harmonized together. It becomes a harmonious blend, and eventually these forms in the text helps you to understand in depth the text, the theme of the poem is what close reading is all about. It is used as a major analytical tool in the academic system of France. It was used, that is, with the name explication de texte. So here all kinds of information related to the passage is analyzed, and the linguistic devices like paradox, irony, ambiguity and tension, they come to a unity of the text. That makes a unified text. Furthermore, an analysis of all kinds of figurative language, including images, symbols, metaphors, simile, is done rather than relying on the author's intention. So critics like I.A. Richards, William Epson, Cleanth Brooks, all of them attempted a close reading of the text. Okay. And a literature journal, Explicator, which was published in 1942, was devoted to close reading. Later, we will be starting deconstruction very soon. So later the deconstructive critics, they used this method in a very exemplary manner. Okay, so that's with the close reading, and you must also remember that these deconstructionists, or that which we will be taking up later, they differed from the new critics. Okay, they were different at the same period or the same time when new criticism was changing the ways in which literary texts were being read. Certain other approaches were also emerging in connection with other disciplines as well. So it was not just in the field of literature, that we had a change. It's not just from the new criticism and the formalism that were emerging, but we had a change, a total change in other disciplines also. There was a renewed interest in social anthropology, mythology and psychoanalysis. See, today we have come to an extent where literature has touched upon every field of every other fields. Like you have literature in connection with science, you have literature in connection with politics, you have literature in connection with commerce, you have literature in connection with pandemic also. The pandemic, how the pandemic has changed the lives of the people. A little bit of research using post-humanist theory in the field of, in relation to the pandemic, where man used to think that he was superior. He was everything. Post-humanism is totally different from humanism. Humanism states what? I taught you that in Renaissance. According to the Renaissance is actually a continuation of humanism, where man is considered very important. Man is the center. Man is important. Everything revolves around him. Man was given more importance. Okay, man as a good human being, man as a social human being, man as nice, and so on. Whereas post-humanism is a continuation of humanism, but it has a difference. It says, it decenters man. Man is not everything. That we have understood. We considered ourselves so superior. We considered ourselves superior to animals. We could tame animals. We could, stop any deadly creature. We considered ourselves Batman and the Avengers, right? But we understood that we are not so. One tiny thing, so invisible as the COVID-19, that virus, that small virus is all that was needed to kill how many people? It cost, it raged the whole world, right? And how many people are dead now? Thousands and thousands. Man able to do. Man could do nothing even now, right? So we cannot consider ourselves so great. So see, we're talking, let's come back to archetypal criticism. So what I was trying to tell you is there was a lot of changes going on. Literature and the texts were being read. There were other changes happening in connection with other disciplines. A renewed interest in social anthropology, mythology and psychoanalysis were coming up. They offered new insights regarding the reading of literature. The most prominent was archetypal literary criticism. Now, archetype is from the Greek word arche, which means beginning, and typos, which means imprint. So it means original pattern in Greek. According to these archetypes, or according to which this original pattern means, according to it, archetypes are the contents of the collective unconscious. They are the primordial images or the psychic residues of repeated patterns of experiences in the lives of our ancestors, which survive in our collective unconscious and are expressed in myth. This was said by Carl Jung. Now, who is Carl Jung? Carl Jung was a very important psychiatrist, a psychoanalyst, and was a great friend of a Swiss psychiatrist, that is, and a good friend of Freud, Sigmund Freud. Okay, and this concept of collective unconscious was brought out or was coined or was spoken about by Carl Jung. It is pronounced Jung and not Jung. Okay, Jung. Carl Jung. Now, so what is this collective unconscious that Carl Jung was speaking about? See, Jung believed in collective unconscious, unlike Freud and his other contemporaries. Freud, he was his good friend, but they differed in many ways. They differed, or they had difference of opinion when it came to various other topics like the collective unconscious and the individual unconscious. And Jung did not believe in Freud's Oedipus complex and all that being, there were a lot of differences. In fact, Jung criticized Freud, and there was a breach in their relationship after that. Anyway, Jung believed in collective unconscious, unlike Freud and his other contemporaries who believed in individual conscious. Jung believed that all elements of an individual's nature are present from birth. According to Jung, collective unconscious is a universal mind. Okay, it's a human mind or the universal mind, and in this universal mind you will find things that is present in everyone, irrespective of who you are or where you are from. Whether you are from America or Africa or India or China, there are things that are wired in us, that are present in us, which forms the collective unconscious. Okay, it is born, it is inborn, it is there from the birth itself. Freud believed that an individual's nature is created after he was born. Okay, but Jung differed from it. That is when they had difference of opinion. To Freud, everything, or he believed that an individual's nature is created after he is born, whereas Jung considers it inborn. And according to Jung, it is the environment just brings out that nature. The environment, it's already there in that person, it is inborn in him, and the environment just brings it out. Whereas Freud, on the other hand, believed that an individual's nature is created after he is born, and the environment is the one that is responsible for creating a person's nature. It's the environment or the situations that creates the nature. That is what Freud believed, whereas Jung differed from it. Jung says it's already inborn, it's wired in us, and once you are born, the individual, the environment or the situation just brings it out. It doesn't create. There is a difference. Jung believed that environment only brings out what is already stored inside him. It does not create anything. It's not new. It's not a new phenomena. It is already the attitude or the archetypes, that is the contents that is already wired in him, that is brought out by the situation, and not create. Environment does not create it, or the situations does not create it. It just brings out what is already stored in him. That's what Jung believed, and this is collective unconscious. Okay. So what is collective unconscious? The idea, this collective unconscious is, in Jung's word, archaic, or I would say primordial types, that is with us, that is with universal images that have existed since the remotest time. Thus, there is this recurring primordial images. What is primordial? Primordial means inborn. It exists in us even before we are born. So they are primordial images of human being in the myth, and myth illustrates those primordial. So archetypes is a typical character, an action or a situation that seems to present or represent a universal pattern of human nature. It can also be called universal symbol. So Jung was influenced by Eastern thoughts like Hinduism, Buddhism, the Taoist cultures, yoga. This made him very unpopular in the West to some extent. Now, archetype, therefore, according to Jung's concept, archetype is a model of a person, a personality or behavior. Every one of us belong to a type of character. Angry man, helpful one, depressive melancholic type. So archetypes have been present in mythology and literature for hundreds and thousands of years. That is from the birth of civilization. So when I say archetypes of the wise old man, the child, the mother, it doesn't mean a child. It means an adult who is like a child, or an adult who is like a mother, who has motherly instincts. And it need not be a female. It can also be a man like a mother who is caring, who is sacrificial, and a wise old man can be as an archetype, which means a person having all the characteristics of a wise man. He need not be an old person. He can be a young person. He can even be a child who behaves like a wise old man. So an archetype is a model, a personality, or a behavior. Okay, and there should be a harmonious blend of all these archetypes in a human being, and this harmonious blend alone makes the mental health. So the mental health of a person is maintained when we are in harmony with these archetypes, or when there is a blend. For example, a man having the characteristics of a child, he may be innocent, he may not be able to take decision, he may need others to take decision for you. Like for instance, Ambili, the film Ambili. Yeah, so that's an archetype. That can be taken as an archetype of a person, of a man who behaves like a child. Okay, and that would be a perfect example, because he does not try to change it. He harmoniously blends with his nature than being in conflict with it. He doesn't go into conflict with it, or he doesn't try to change it and act as though he's a mature human being. At that time, the moment when he accepts it and he is in harmony with it, then he will have peace. Okay, so we all have this universal psyche. And therefore, they all get embedded in the form of myth. Okay, when they get embedded in the form of, they come in the form of myth, in the form of literature. It also comes in the form of dreams. But these dreams becomes our personal experiences. Okay, so when it becomes a personal experience, according to Jung, dreams are our desires. The suppressed desires. Okay, so dreams are the ones that helps us to get what we won't be getting, that we cannot get. Okay, so they are dreams according to Jung, and he differs totally from Freud's dreams. So he says that the dreams are personal experiences, and this, when it comes in the form of social experiences, you get myths and literature. So myth and literature is concerning social experiences, the society, the social experience. Okay, when these archetypes are embedded or gets embedded in the form of social experiences, you get myth and literature. All right. So like you have, it can be, as I said, a universal symbol. It can be a character, it can be a theme, it can be a situation. Okay, it can be a characters like hero. Heroes are archetypes. You have heroes everywhere, irrespective of which culture, which caste, which place you belong to. You have the devil, the evil people. You have the magicians, you have father figures, mothers, All these characters are also archetypes. There are conflicts. Conflicts are also archetypes. Like for instance, there is always a young versus old. There is tradition versus modernity everywhere. So these are all archetypes and these are all universal symbols. You have themes, archetypal themes, like love, like religion, war. You have myths, like Adam and Eve, God and Satan. You have symbols, symbols of the sun, the time, colors, fire, etc. So when certain symbols, motifs, characters continuously or reoccur not only in a particular nation but many other nations as well, that is, it gets into the stories having similar themes, motives, characters, and many communities, and they seem to acquire a similar pattern, then we refer to them as archetypes. Okay? So, not just in one country or one nation, but many nations, where you have similar situations, where you have similar themes, where you have similar motives, characters, and or communities, and they have a specific pattern, they are given a specific pattern and it has a similarity, then we refer to them as archetypes. So the archetypes are what? What are archetypes? Archetypes are universal patterns or symbols or codes. Okay. They involve the symbols of light and darkness, colors, symbols of nature, cycles of seasons, and so on. Everybody is familiar with the idea of myth. I don't have to tell you. Myths are stories that have come down to us from generations and which we have become a part, or which has become a part of our consciousness. And we refer to them as symbols. Even the characters and the situations become symbols. You have Ramayana, where Ravan is the eternal symbol of evil. So you have a myth. You have myth, Ramayana. In Ramayana you have the myth of Ravan, which has come, these myths are stories that have come down to us from generations, and they become a part of our conscious. As long as we are Indians, we are aware of it. And these myths, they become so embedded in us that sometimes we refer to them as symbols. So Ravan is the eternal symbol of evil. So when you find an evil character, you can associate it with, it's an archetype of the evil. It's an archetype of the Ravan, of Ravan. And you have Ram. Ram is a symbol, eternal symbol of good. If you look at Mahabharata, you have Duryodhan. Duryodhan is a symbol of greed. Shaguni. Shaguni becomes a symbol of cunningness and trickery. You have the Pandavas. The Pandavas become the symbol of good. And if you read the present day literature, you will see that the Mahabharata myth manifests itself in different works of literature. You can find it in many works of literature, how they are represented. This myth of Mahabharata, how it manifests in several works of Indian literature or several works of literature. All writers seem to go back to many of these myths. Even in our films, you can see that. And these writers, they may try to adapt them. These writers may try to refute them. Some may try to refute them. Some may try to re-represent them. And thus is born the idea of myth. Okay. And there are other people who deal with myth. Now, if you look at this from a different angle, there are other people who deal with myths of different religion, of different communities, of nations. And if you try to observe a pattern in them, you will be able to find that they are universal. It's not just the Mahabharata myth. You will also find that it becomes universal. Carl Jung defines myths as follows, quote, myths are first and foremost psychic phenomena that reveal the nature of the soul, unquote. So the idea of myth, that, as I was talking to you or I told you earlier, is to do with the collective unconscious. So it's all there in us. It is the recurring primordial images of human beings in the myth, and this myth illustrates those primordial images. He says that we carry these archetypes and they are stored in us. In fact, these primordial images manifest without understanding Jung, you cannot understand Fraser. Okay, so we begin with Jung because it is Jung who actually brings in this collective unconscious and the archetypes. Obviously, we'll be doing Jung in psychoanalytical theory also. Anyway, so what are archetypes? Archetypes are universal images and patterns, and they are stored in our individual and collective unconscious. The collective unconscious are shared by a race or a culture. So being a Christian may be in my collective unconscious. That is my part of my brain where all images are stored. I have a lot of archetypes related to Christian philosophy. Me being a Christian, I have a lot of archetypes that are stored in my brain relating to Christian philosophy. And these archetypes could include concepts related to love, concepts related to religion, concepts related to death, birth, life, struggle, survival, and so on. So my collective unconscious has a lot to do. I'm just giving an example. If you are taking the Christian philosophy, me being a Christian will have all these areas of these areas will have a lot to do with my Christian philosophy. Okay, and they are archetypes. These archetypes, and these archetypes exist in my unconscious part of exist in the unconscious part of my mind or my soul or my brain, as Jung puts it. And it is recreated, and it is there in every individual, not just me, in everyone, according to what he or she or to which community or place he or she belongs to. And it is recreated in literature, it is recreated in other forms of art also, in movies, in art, in literature, and so on. Basically, this collective unconscious is part of the human brain, according to Jung. It exists in the subconscious realm of our mind. It has both individual and collective conscience. So individual conscious would be, say, I had a very turbulent, very hostile life or childhood, maybe. Okay, just suppose that I or somebody had a very turbulent, I had a very happy childhood, but yeah, just imagine that somebody had a very turbulent or hostile childhood, and it is repressed. The effect of it is repressed in that person's mind, and it gets stored there, and it gets stored where? In the realm of the subconscious mind. Okay, that is the individual conscience. Okay, likewise, every community, race, nation has a collective unconscious. That again, which something that the people of that community share, the people of the race share, the people of the nations share. As Indians, marriage, you can say marriage is an archetype. It happens universally, right? It happens in Africa, it happens in Europe, it happens in India, it happens in China, it happens everywhere. So marriage can be considered as an archetype. Yes, and each one is different also. The marriage procedures, the marriage functions the traditions are totally different. Everyone has a difference there. Every type is different. But wedding is it has like Hindu marriage will have a similar collective conscious. When you take Hindu marriages alone, you will have a similarity in its tradition. You will have a similarity in the Jewish marriage. You will have a similarity in Christian marriages. You will have a similarity in the South Indian marriages. You will have a similarity in the North Indian marriages. You will have similarity in the European marriages, and so on. So these are collective unconscious. Okay, so though they are different, there is a collective conscience that everyone in that particular race or community share. So marriage can be considered as an archetype. It happens everywhere. They are all different, but a particular community will share a similar kind of traditions or similar kind of pattern. And if you look at it universally, marriage also is the union of two souls. It is a legal license to be together. So there also you can consider it as a collective unconscious. Clear? Okay. Now we shall also, before we move on to Fraser, let's look at some of the archetypes that Jung concentrates on. Jung concentrates on many archetypes. One is shadow. If you look at shadow, many stories places shadow as an important archetype. Okay. Then you have wise old man. Most stories have wise old men. Innocent child or the child hero. Or you have the archetype of the child, where and one example would be Ambli. Mother figure. Then you have the innocent maiden. Then the anima and the animus. Now that is what may need an explanation. The anima in man and the animus in woman. Anima in man means the feminine element in man, and animus in women means the masculine element in women. You also have other archetypes like trickster, the hero, and so on. Okay, so that's about it with Carl Jung. Now it is based on Jung that the rest of the team starts their work. Now we begin our archetypal criticism based on your textbook. The first person, or the main important person of archetypal criticism, we haven't come to the person who can be considered the father yet, but the main person of archetypal criticism is James G Fraser, and in his very seminal work, The Golden Bough, he followed the theory propounded or proposed by the psychiatrist Carl Jung. And Carl Jung is the person who applied the term archetype for primordial images, psychic residue and collective unconscious. He gave the term, Carl Jung gave the term he gave the term archetype. Okay. Now James Fraser, he presents the concept. He takes a lot. He's influenced by Carl Jung, and he presents the concept of death and rebirth as omnipresent in most cultural mythologies. Here he concentrates on this phenomenon, death and rebirth. Fraser attempted to establish myths as a manifestation of natural vegetation cycle, that is, death as final harvest and rebirth as spring. So the natural vegetation, using the natural vegetation circle, he attempted to bring out these concepts, the concept of death and rebirth, using this vegetation circle, the natural vegetation circle. He gives the example of Christ, his crucifixion, as the sacrifice of the hero, and his death as a final harvest, and the resurrection as rebirth or spring. So even this, according to him, has its primitive origin, as even this results from the natural cycle of death and recreation, it seems. So Fraser focused mostly on the materiality of myth, whereas Carl Jung focused on the myths on the unconscious, and Fraser focused on the materiality of myths. So it was a culturally elaborated representation of the contents of the deepest recess of human psyche, the world of archetypes. The deepest recess means the shared part of the unconscious. That is okay. Now next you have Maud Botkin. Maud Botkin was one of the first scholars to apply Jung's ideas to literature. She rejects the notion that archetypes are stamped upon the physical organisms inherited in the structure of the brain, but they are persistent, they are cultural symbols that are passed, according to her, they are persistent cultural symbols that are passed down through generations, through folklores, myths or literature. So she says it's not something that is already inherited or becomes a part of the structure, or it is not inborn. She rejects that notion, and she says that it is something that is given down to us through folklores or myths and literature, and that is how we get it. That is, Jung said they were part of the unconscious. Jung said they were part of the unconscious mind shared by everybody, irrespective of what or who we are. It is inborn. Whereas Botkin, she rejects that idea, and she says that it is passed down to us by generation. She has used the archetypal pattern to refer to something that lives within us, and which is source of medium of the effective presentation of ancient times.